So oftentimes as a Christian, when I'm sharing truths about Jesus with other people, they often say to me, hey, that's just your interpretation of things. For example, if I'm trying to share about the issue of when someone says to me, all paths lead to heaven, and I were to say, actually, Jesus is the only way to God, the most common response I always get is, hey, that's just your interpretation. So that's what we're going to be talking today. Is everything just a matter of interpretation? So in response to the objection of someone saying, hey, that's just your interpretation of things from the Bible, here's some follow-up questions that I usually run with. Number one, is there ever a wrong interpretation? If there's a wrong interpretation, it insinuates that there has to be a right one. Number two, can one's perspective ever be correct? And if the person were to say no, then I would say, is that correct? So obviously there can be correct perspectives. Number three, why would you ever disagree with another interpretation? What does it matter if everything is an interpretation and there is no truth? The fourth thing that I would ask is that, is it universally true that everything is a matter of perspective? And if so, then clearly not everything is a matter of perspective. Essentially, what one would be saying is that everything is a matter of perspective, and that's a matter of fact. These questions are purposefully just to start toiling up the soil and start moving forward and digging up any logical contradictions that the person might be saying, because obviously if we can say things that are logically contradictory, there's no point of moving forward in the conversation because we can't get to a reasonable conclusion. So let's run with another example. Like I was mentioning in the beginning, something very common to say is that all paths really lead to heaven, and that for Christians to interpret out of their Bible that Jesus is the only way is just a misinterpretation. So generally in that situation, I would take someone to actual scripture. For example, Acts 4:12 that says, salvation is found in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given to mankind by which we must be saved. And then I would say, okay, you're saying that's just my interpretation of things. Okay, well then how would you interpret that? Help me make a better interpretation here. And I would ask for that. So if you guys have any better interpretations, if you disagree with me, then go ahead and drop that below. I am fully ready to change my perspective on things if there's a better explanation of the claim that's being made. Another thing is John 14:6, where Jesus himself says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Nobody comes to the Father except through me. What do we think that Jesus meant by that? Let's try our best to come together as a community of friends and searching after truth and say, what is the best way to interpret these things? So I'm just going to ask for more clarity. If you're telling me that my interpretation is wrong, do you really mean that you just don't like my interpretation of things? Because if so, I can tell you that there are plenty of really hard truths to get behind that are explained in the Bible, but just because they're hard doesn't mean that we can just throw them away. If they're true, and we have to deal with them as it is. It's not a selective thing here. Like I referred to in my last video, we're not in an ice cream shop picking different toppings. If something's true, it's true for everybody. We have to admit that there are abiding truths and historical facts we cannot simply wish away by saying it's just a matter of interpretation. For example, the Holocaust or slavery, how are we supposed to right these wrongs if one could just put it up and wish it away by saying it's a matter of interpretation? You must have to see the importance of affirming some kind of truths, not just throwing everything up for interpretation. So the way that I think about it is actually a dartboard analogy. So if you have a dartboard, obviously you know at the center there is a bullseye, and there's different rings going out, and another ring on the outside, and things of that sort. So at the end of the day, people can throw up their interpretations at different spots, but there is a bullseye at the center, which is the truth. But to say everything is just a matter of interpretation would be like saying that there is never anyone that's going to hit that middle point. There is no middle point, but there is a middle point. And so this is really important to think about. Some interpretations are better than others, and to see this is not simply a matter of interpretation. Think about the dartboard analogy. There's some people that are closer to that bullseye in the center than others, and that's a matter of fact. Because as we learned in the last video, there is such thing as absolute truth. To say there is no absolute truth is making an absolute truth claim. So that bullseye does exist. And now it's just a matter of getting closer and closer and closer and closer to the final bullseye, which is truth, which is what I hope that we're all trying to go after. I mean, I know that there's a lot of other things in life that take our attention, but truth is equal to freedom. I mean, that's why I kind of got on this journey to start off with. You can look at my video of going from an atheist to a Christian. I took that journey because I think truth inherently is good, because it means freedom of the mind, and freedom for the human. Truth means that people are not wrapped up in falsity. Falsity causes blindness, causes you not to see what is really there, and I would rather be someone that can see than to be blind. And I hope that you guys feel the same way. In regards to this objection, I said something very similar in the past when it came to people talking about the resurrection of Jesus. Hey, that's just people interpreting things to match their theology, to match their religion, until one day I was questioned and came into contact with someone who gave me 5 historical facts that are affirmed by both theistic and atheistic scholars, the majority of atheistic scholars. And if you want to look further into this, you can look up Gary Habermas and his the minimal facts argument. And here's the facts that I had to run through. And so just to give you an example of what to do when you're in a situation of having to interpret, what I did was say, hey, these are facts. Now I have to make my interpretation of them. They are affirmed by the majority of skeptical, even scholars. So there are facts about history. And so let's say if I can come up with a better explanation of the evidence. Because in history, the criteria that historians use is looking for the best explanation of the evidence. So we can do a little fun thing right now and look for the best explanation of this evidence here. We have, number 1, Jesus' death by crucifixion and empty tomb. I just added that in. Obviously, if there was no empty tomb, the Jewish leaders could go and get his body that had his dead body in there and say, hey, Christians, why are you saying that he rose from the dead? Obviously, he's right here. So, boom, Jesus' death by crucifixion and empty tomb. 2, the earliest disciples' experiences of the risen Jesus. So obviously dictated in the Gospels. A question for another day is, are the Gospels reliable? Believe me, I'm going to get into that. But the Gospels do affirm that the disciples did have experiences of the risen Jesus after he died. Not just visions or ghosts or apparitions, but sitting down, eating with him for multiple days in front of multiple people from different areas. So, boom, 3. Their subsequent transformations to the point of being willing to die for their belief. Not for what they believed in, but for what they said they saw. Obviously, persecution of Christians was very rampant. And so these people were put in situations, some of them, another video will talk about why that is the case and why I do believe this. But when given the ability to recant, many Christians, including the disciples, did not recant because they said they saw the risen Jesus. So, 3 facts. Number 4, the resurrection as the very center of early apostolic apostles' preaching. Fact number 5, the conversion and resulting transformation of Paul and James. James was actually the brother of Jesus. So one of the things I like to think about, and I had to think about, even though I don't have a brother, I'm an only child, but you might have a brother. So my question would be to you, what would it take to convince you that your brother, younger brother, older brother, has been crucified and was risen from the dead by God, to affirm that he is the Son of God and therefore king of this new kingdom that he was talking about ushering in? What would it take to convince you that your brother was the risen Messiah that was talked about, during that time? Also, the conversion of Paul. Paul was an enemy of the Christians. Paul was the way that many of you think about Christians, like going after people, just putting their beliefs on them and just extremely dogmatic. Think about Paul like that times 10. He was, actually, if you read in Acts as well, we referred to Acts earlier, he was there and was holding coats for the people that were stoning one of the Christians named Stephen. Paul Moral of the story, Paul hated Christians, and he wanted to get rid of them because he thought they were extremely ruining the proper tradition and the proper truth of Judaism. So you got the conversion and transformations. This dude wrote a majority of the New Testament, and this was the brother of Jesus. So these are the 5 facts, and now we have to take these facts and, you're right, do some interpretation. We're going to look for the best explanation of the evidence. That's something that we have to do. We have to do that. This is us right now on the dartboard throwing the darts to see if we can hit the center. If you have a true belief, a belief that corresponds to reality, a belief that corresponds to what happened in history, then boom, you're on the bullseye. If you're over on the center, obviously those beliefs are not true. You're throwing out an interpretation, but at the end of this day, it's not just up to interpretation. There is a truth. There is a bullseye in the center. These are 5 facts that have a real, truthful explanation. And so I challenge you to go ahead and, try to find the best explanation of this evidence. Go ahead and leave a comment down below. But I just wanted to do that with you to, have a little thought experiment and really just go through what it means to do some proper interpreting, and to affirm that there is a bullseye in the center. I really want to knock that point, and I would say that interpretations, but making reasonable intellectual interpretations towards the goal of hitting the bullseye. That's, I don't mind talking about interpretations, but let's put it in the right realm. When you say that's just your interpretation, you're kind of saying there is no truth. Everything's just up there. Interpretations are, a thing. I'm okay to talk about them, but you have to also say that there is a bullseye in the center, and some interpretations can be true. So although there are many perspectives about many different things, that doesn't mean that we can't draw true conclusions about a certain matter of things. Like the dartboard analogy, there are interpretations, but at the end of the day, there is a bullseye in the middle, and that's what we're looking for, and I hope you guys are excited about it. I plan to talk about more extensive things, but really I had to start in the beginning because I know if I were to make those extensive videos, you guys would respond to me saying, hey, that's just your interpretation, or what's true for you is true for you, or there is no truth, or that's just your perspective, and we all have our own perspectives, and that's true for us. But hopefully that you're getting from this video and the last video, that's not the case. So we're doing the proper work before we jump into everything else, and I hope that it's not too boring. Thanks.